Right, let's get cracking. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. You're in the right place. This is our part of the WorkBuzz Webinar series, and today we're going to be talking about creating a preventative workplace well-being culture. So just a couple of housekeeping bits first. The webinar is being recorded, so a copy will be emailed to you after the event, along with an accompanying digital learning pack, which Fi, who's our special guest today, is kindly providing. If you've got any questions during the webinar, then please use the Q&A feature. We will be monitoring that, as will my colleague Rebecca, so we'll bring those questions into the conversation as they arise. And your host today is me. I'm Dawn. I'm Enterprise Client Lead at WorkBuzz. For those of you who haven't come across WorkBuzz before, we like to think of ourselves as HR's secret weapon. So we're an employee listening platform, and we help organisations gather real-time feedback to improve the employee experience and build a more inclusive culture. So just a little bit about us there. You can link out to our website if you want to find out more about the difference we make for our customers at workbuzz.com. And we share loads of content. So on there, you can find ebooks on your first 90 days as a HR leader, a really smart employee engagement and experience measurement and metrics framework that we just put together that helps look at the linkage between engagement and other business metrics. And if you're really keen, come and join our community. So you can scan the QR code that's on the screen at the moment, and you can come and join our Employee Experience Hub. And in there, you can network with peers, you can learn, connect. We've even got e-learning in there as well. It's free to join, and it's fun. We have lots going on in there, so feel free to join us in our EX Hub. But without further ado, let's get on to the real reason that we're here today. So well-being is at the top of everyone's agenda. I think the last 3 years have really increased the prominence of this. And if we think about ourselves, if we think about our own well-being, I think we've never been more intentional about trying to keep ourselves in a good space with everything else that the world keeps throwing at us. So what we wanted to do today was bring in experts to talk about ways that you can integrate a preventative and responsive well-being culture and put the right foundations in place, and the important role that leadership has to play in that. So we said we're recording it. We're going to provide you with a learning pack afterwards as well. So hopefully we're going to arm you with some tools to get you thinking about well-being differently today. And there's pictures of brains just to get you excited. So our special guest is Fi Hills. Fi is a behavioural culture and wellbeing specialist and the founder of the Virtual Coffeehouse. So rather than me introduce you and make a bad job of it, Fi, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, why you do what you do, and why wellbeing is so important to you as well. And just so you know, Fi is moving house today, so she's squidged into the corner of a room while the rest of the house is being moved away. So how would you rate your own well-being right now, Fi?
Not very preventative today. I say do what I say, not what I do. Yeah, one of those moves is very stressful, but overcoming it, and this is a really welcome interlude, should we say. So my background is in behaviour. Was originally in call centres, originally performing arts call centres, and then over to behaviour and cultural change for quite a long time, I'd say a couple of decades. And in that time, I developed the last 10 years something called cafe style learning, which was experiential bite-sized learning, particularly for behaviour transformation and change. And then moved that on in the pandemic, this startup for digitising and the epic process, which we will go through today, which is experiential, playful, iterative and collaborative, which is a methodology to accelerate and scale change, behaviour change. So that's where we are, work with workplaces, mixture of private and public sector. So that's enough about me. Let's talk about preventative well-being.
Yeah, and we wanted to start just to, I guess, to give a little bit of context to why this has increased in importance. And at WorkBuzz, we run many surveys across similar, really, a lot of private and public sector organisations. And the biggest shift that we've seen is the importance and the expectation around leadership. So in the bottom right-hand quadrant, we can see that leadership now has a bigger impact on engagement than it did prior to COVID. And I think there's reasons for that. We've also seen an increased focus on well-being and recognition that you can see kind of in the bottom left, kind of almost shifting into that bottom right quadrant as well. And I think there's a reason for this. They're all interconnected. You know, when we think about well-being, when we think about working for an organisation that cares about us as individuals, then all of these things come together. So it's not really a surprise why we're here today to think about the foundations that need to be in place from a cultural perspective, to really ensure that we are creating environments where people feel that they are cared for, where they feel like they can be themselves at work and they can bring their whole selves to work as well. And just to add to that, then we've seen leadership scores drop from 2019 to the present day, as you can see on this graph. And then also well-being drop as well. It did increase during the first lockdown, I think, because of the huge emphasis that organisations were putting on well-being, but then it's dropped off again. And only this week I've been in a couple of conversations where that's been reinforced with HR leaders that I've been speaking to as well, to say, you know, we did focus on it. We were having all these great conversations. It was front of mind, and now it's almost back to business. So, you know, all of this is not telling us something we don't already know, but it provides great context to what you're going to be talking about today, doesn't it, Fi?
It does. I'm going to focus on leadership. So we've picked a theme and thought that these scores allow us to pick on a theme of, you know, whose job is it anyway? Is it, you know, what is the role of leaders to help develop preventative well-being? So we're very much sort of dovetailing these two things in.
Amazing. So I'm going to let Fi share now, and then Fi's going to steer from here and take us through her experiences and just the context and thoughts behind creating this preventative wellbeing culture.
Okay, just give me a couple of seconds, guys. I'm already whizzing away with WorkBuzz. Now, right. I want to start with the end in mind. So the end in mind was originally the World Economic Forum, which is really good for the job profiles for future bases. It's the best we've found. Top 10 skills on 2025 was all of the higher order thinking skills. I won't read them all out, but like analytical, creative, the higher order thinking, along with the sort of emotional well-being, physical well-being, mental well-being. Okay. So basically the whole of our mind and emotional state. That's what's important. So the higher the sort of technological skills come in, like AI, the more we need to up our game on human skills. So let's just call these human skills for now. What's happened with the pandemic is it's accelerated the need for these skills. So rather than 2025, the prediction of that list, you can see, it's now, we need them now. So that's sort of caused, in a way, even higher levels on the sort of talent war, because it's not 7 billion people on the planet obviously have talent, but they maybe don't have the skills we need as much. So there becomes this sort of talent war because they don't have the skills we need to really thrive for many companies in this new world of work. So that's what we've found. So that's a sort of backdrop. With this in mind, let's take a look at, you know, a state of play. So we're trying to get to create a learning organization. We no longer really call this a learning organization, we call it scalable learning, 21st century scalable learning organization, which sounds like it needs technology, but it's actually about really collaboration. More about that after. So really, let's just call it a learning organization, for want of a better expression. Now, before we go into the state of play, let's have a look at the state of play when our brain is in a state of great play and experiential play, should we say. This is what it looks like. On the left-hand side, it's lit up like a Christmas tree. And that's when we're immersed into learner-centered environment, be it for learning or behavior change. On the right-hand side is when we're passive. So this is when we're information-based rather than transformation-based. We're teacher-focused, trainer-focused. which is where we've come from, but where we, for a lot of the interventions we do, we need to reduce that and up the play or up the experiential learning. Now, experiential is not always playful, but playful is always experiential. Just to focus on that a second. But experiential is always essential if you're looking at behavior transformation or cultural change. So that's the brain. We'll be back to that brain because it's a very interesting diagram and it proves a point. Very much so. I think we've got the source of it as well there. Now, 53.6% of employers are focused more on, not surprisingly, on mental health and well-being. And in fact, it's their top challenge for 2022. This is partially because of COVID, but was already leaning on to that before we even went into COVID. Certainly emotional health and mental health was taking a downturn anyway with disruptive change. But of course, that catalyst, it was a catalyst, COVID. So it's a bit enthusiastic, the slides, hang on. Right, so 75% of the people of low engagement, attrition and absenteeism is not actually caused by the greater cultural problem, but rather the relationships in the local team, which is how we dovetail into what Dawn was saying about this leadership and how the role of leadership has changed and how they're now expected to take on a lot more responsibility when it comes to human development and behavior and cultural change and very much well-being. Now, they're not always trained up to do that and certainly don't always have the tools to do it. So we need to address that if we want to prevent physical, mental and emotional ill health. And of course we do, not just because we want a thriving team, but because we want a healthy organization. But really, these are the needs not met in the job and the relationships caused poor in the local team. So the great news is about this figure is that if the problem's there, so is the solution. So we know where it is, we're halfway there. So 91% of organizations cited a breakdown in trust as being the main cause of people problems. That was our research prior to COVID. And the update since is it hasn't really changed. It did go down during COVID, like that figure went down, not trust. So trust became less important for the first year of COVID, but now it's come up again as being there's a lack of trust and organizations, certainly head of HR, feel that this is a cause of a lot of the problem in the organization. So some of these things are not really surprising. I mean, now the myth is that creative people are more likely to get mental health issues. Now there's a lot of myths I could have put in here, but I want to move on to the sort of solution here. But this is one myth I did want to share with you because we need people to be creative, critical thinking, and use these higher order thinking skills. But up until now, they do seem to be an outlier. And when I do like workshops or anything like that, and I say stand up, so there might be 100 people in the room, stand up if you think you're creative, and 4 people stand up. And it really is not very often, not more than that. And then I say, okay, stand up if you think you're logical thinking, and the rest stand up. And of course, this is ludicrous, and it really is ludicrous. But that's for a different webinar. But enough to say that this is just a myth. And it's very important that we understand that to address the problem. And before we move on to looking at some solutions, how to, if you like, I want to look at the state of physical health. And this is a case study, a real case study, a recent case study. And I want to talk to you about these figures. It may not be the same, of course, in every organization, and it won't be. But what it does do is give us an indication of how we can predict what the talent strategy or plan or resources look like in a couple of years' time. And it is not a good look at this moment in time. And what it does tell us is it needs addressing. So we got high blood pressure, 37.5, cholesterol, 26, high glucose, which predicts obviously diabetes, 28%, overweight, 54%, and that could have been obese, all the way from overweight to obese, to be fair. Physical inactivity, 28%, high stress, 43%, not surprising at the moment. And unhealthy behavior covers things like bad eating, drink, alcohol, drugs, things like that, and other habitual things that are not very healthy. So what that tells us, if we don't address these, it gives us a picture of our employee, not just experience, but also health and well-being in maybe 12 to 18 to 2 years' time. So that's why it's important we understand our numbers, and numbers to include physical, mental, and emotional health, not just the physical health, or not just the mental health, but all of it. We need the full picture is what I guess I'm trying to say. Now, there is this sort of, I call it a double paradigm shift. Now, there's loads of paradigm shift, as we all may know at the moment, but this double paradigm shift is what I want to focus on today. And that, the first is the Great Resignation. Employees are now in the driving seat. So I just want to read this out. Companies are burning through talent with reports of 30% churn rate. In the figures of 100 employees, 30 will resign. I couldn't have done those figures myself. A red hot jobs market may force some to move on, and some pay hikes as 20% or more. So it's pushing the salaries up at a time when companies may not be able to afford it, while others are leaving industry or the industry altogether. So people want vitality, they want individuality, and they want inclusivity, going back to your graph, Dawn. Yeah. The second paradigm shift that we need to address, and this is really the one we're going to be addressing today, is the role of the leader, how it's changed, and if you like, why it's changed. So it's all very well saying it has changed, but why has it changed? And I think in the new world of work, and it's not because of COVID, but because of also disruptive technology change, leaders only have control, really, over three main things, which is the talent they take into their business, sometimes, because of course they may inherit a team, the workplace environment they create for them when they're there. So of course, that's why this becomes the leader's role. Is the environment conducive to well-being? Is the culture conducive to well-being? Or is it creating ill health? You know, how much can we improve the environment to improve the well-being of our people? And how well they communicate and influence people's thinking and behavior, both up and down and around. So that's the leader's role. Now, the employees, when we look at it from their point of view, they have control over which organization they join, fair enough. And they have control over their internal environment, meaning their mind, their emotional well-being, their emotional regulation, if they have the skills and the techniques and tools to do it. And the will, of course. And they also have, you know, control over how competent they can become. And you know, with a growth mindset, and how good they are at communicating and influencing the people around them. So in other words, everybody needs to have good influencing and communication skills, both the employees and the leaders, which sort of goes without saying. Now, one of the issues is that we're very often trying to influence outside our circle of control. So the leaders want to control what the people think and do and may not be able to, but it's understand why they need to or want to. That's completely understandable. And the employees want to sort of say, well, why don't the leaders change? So everybody is trying to control something outside their ability to control, their circle of control. And this appears to be what's happening. So the paradigm shift in the bottom line is that leaders need to somehow come away from doing the thinking for their people and instead facilitate them to think for themselves. Now, this doesn't actually sound like a big shift, but it means that the role of the leader is to now facilitate more. That's why they talk about coaching cultures and things like that. So I've now got to facilitate people to help them manage their own well-being. I can manage the environment if I'm the leader, and I can help to make it a better environment, but I can't control people's internal well-being. So how do I help them? I facilitate them. So to do that, I need a lot different skills as a leader. And I certainly need tools. Sorry, Dawn, were you gonna?
I was just going to say one thing that's come into my head in all of this as well is that to enable managers and leaders to be able to facilitate people to think for themselves, it's about knowing them, isn't it? And that is, again, within their circle of control. It's about really getting to know the people that work with you and around you as people. So that you're better able to understand and support them and coach them and mentor them and do all of those things. But it's taking that time, isn't it, to get to know people properly?
Yes, and you made a good point there. It is about individualizing leadership. So it's moving from universalizing approach to individualizing. And of course, the only way we're going to know that is by asking their needs. So your needs are different, my needs are different, everybody's needs are different. So it's individualizing that. And that's why a lot of this, I don't want to use the word unfortunately or anything, but it does sit with the first line or second line leader. It does, because they're in control of facilitating this. So we need to invest a lot more in helping them with the skills they need and the new skills they need and the tools they need to make it happen. Because let's face it, they're not all neuroscientists and they're not all well-being experts, they're leaders. So that's a good point you just made there, really good. And that dovetails in, by the way, to employee engagement and experience.
Absolutely, yeah.
So how are we doing for time? Because I wanted to move on to the, brilliant timing, look at that. So the how, because everybody's here to say, well, that's all right. How do you do it though? Or, you know, what's your opinion of how you do it? And going into this, I would say it's not about filling people's heads with prescriptive concepts and ideas. We know that. But it's about drawing out. So the ultimate aim for the organisation is to get people to share tacit knowledge so that learning can scale, and also create new knowledge together.
Right. For everyone, like I'm a bit of a learner. So when we were chatting before the webinar, you mentioned tacit knowledge and I didn't know what that meant. So that might just be my lack of understanding. I Googled it. But can you just explain what you mean by tacit knowledge, please?
Yeah, it's one of those words that you feel
sounds
like
amazing.
You know what it means? Like it is a bit jargony. Right. So there's implicit knowledge, tacit knowledge is implicit knowledge. Right, explicit knowledge is that stuff you get on Google. I search, you know, when was World War II? When did it finish? When was D-Day? I'm going to get pretty explicit knowledge. It's stuff you can write down. It's stuff you can share easily. It's dated. Actually, it's the stuff you do exams on, sadly, for the most part. Right, so tacit knowledge is implicit knowledge that is not just unique to me, but it's my experience, it's my learning, and I want to share that with you. So if I'm sharing tacit knowledge and we're all sharing tacit knowledge together, we're sharing talent, we're sharing creative ideas, we're sharing that stuff that you can't write down easily.
So it's like your own lived experience, isn't it? It's the stories. And like one of my favourite TED Talks is the Brené Brown one on vulnerability. So it's that willingness to share your own experiences to help others, isn't it? And to learn together.
Yeah. So that's tacit knowledge sharing. Yeah. Okay. So it is storytelling. Of course, storytelling is the way we share learning. It's the way culture develops. But it's also maybe a talent I may have that I can't explain if someone wanted to model me. So say I had a talent of riding a bike and I want to share how to do it quicker, faster, or whatever. I'm maybe not explaining this very well, but I am moving, so you've got to forgive me. And I might explain and I'll try and share that with you. And you can hear that that's quite difficult. Well, how do you do it so it's 10% faster than anybody else? Well, the way I do it is I point my toe down. You know, this is tacit to me. So to tell you about it is very, very hard. More difficult than just explaining ABC. And that's tacit knowledge. And that's how you get scalable learning. 2 things. Please watch John Hagel, because he's the god on Hagel, spelled H-A-G-L-E, I think, or E-L, one or the other. I know him very well, as in his work. But John Hagel, all his stuff will tell you about scalable learning, and it isn't what you think it is. That's the odd thing. So the way we get scalable learning is create tacit knowledge sharing, which means we need psychologically safe spaces, small groups, which goes against the sort of scale technology thing, and create new knowledge together. So that's how you get it.
Okay.
Which is interesting. So I hope that's explained that one. So here's the how we have worked out, but it gives us a good journey and also a good process to look at and follow parts of it, or just use it as a sort of model to dovetail into your own. On the left hand side, you've got experiential, playful, iterative and collaborative. EPIC. That is the methodology and the blend. So that drives the blend of what we need to do at different times on the journey. The journey part is, so the journey to workplace preventative well-being is that it follows a natural transformational journey, is how we transform as humans. So the first thing we do is ignite change. So we have to be interested, we have to be given a motive. Why should I change? What's in it for me? Yeah, I ignite change. So that'll tend to be very high energy. And then you've got the embed change. Now, most companies are very good at ignite, and then it sort of falls off. You know, we know it. That's it. That's me in my life. That's most people in their lives, I think, unless they're, you know, I don't know, like an athlete or something. But embed, habitual thinking and behavior change is a completely different approach that you need to achieve that section of the journey. So the way we ignite is not the way we get habit change, but sometimes we try and do the whole thing and roll it into one. It doesn't work. So the next part of the journey is grow, which is developing skills, which we can do when we've got the habit change done and when we've got the inspiration and we've bought into this whole change. And then sustain is pretty obvious. We need to sustain that change. And actually, this should be a circle, because then you go around and do it all again. And that's it. So I'm going to break that down to the how to give you the bits in the middle. Now, I think, did someone put something in the chat? Is that?
Yeah, John, who heads up our people science team, kindly shared a link to the John Hagel stuff that you mentioned. So thanks, John.
Thank you. Thank you ever so much. He's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant, his stuff. Okay, so let's move on and let's break that down so we get some takeaways. So learner-centered, difference between learner-centered, I'm not going to assume anyone does or not know. I don't want to insult people if they already know, but trainer-centered is focused on information-based telling. I'm the expert, I'm giving you information. We do still need trainer-centered, but we need to balance it out. Learner-centered is when we put the learner at the center of the experience. There is no wrong answer. There's no prescriptive outcome. We're putting them in to create the learning outcome. Remember the tacit knowledge, create new knowledge, learner-centered. Now, for behavior and culture change, you most definitely need learner-centered. You do need some knowledge. Keep it 80-20.
And when we're talking about well-being, what does learner-centered, what does that look like? Where does it kind of start?
So for any cultural change, and that includes well-being. So I just want to, you just made a really good point there that's good to point out at this point. Culture per se, an organization might want to create their own unique culture, like by embedding values, and they'll have 5 principles or 3, whatever it may be, and they want to create that unique culture. Of course they do. But every organization needs a preventative well-being culture as a foundation first. Because if we try and embed values or unique culture on a toxic environment, I'm calling it toxic just to make a point, if in any way, if that is not working, it needs to create a physical, mental and emotional well-being. And that's what we call preventative, because if the culture is okay, we get less ill health on all of these spectrums. So all of those numbers will go down on the data. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
Now, it didn't answer your question as to why learner-centered. That is, for any behaviour and cultural change, we're going to do some intervention. That intervention may be experiential workshops, it could be away days, it could be books, it could actually be any type of intervention. But the important thing is to give the baton over to the learners. You give them the tools and you facilitate rather than train.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's why it's included in the sort of well-being theme. And of course, to do learner-centered, it's got to be psychologically safe. Why? Because it's got to be inclusive, it's safe to create, it's safe to take risks, because remember, I might get it wrong, but I'm in a stimulated environment. Safe to challenge the status quo, obviously. I am going to, if it's learner-centered. It's safe to contribute without feeling silly or feeling like I might get it wrong. And of course, I have to feel respected and accepted. So it has to be psychologically safe. Now, you could argue, so does all of the workplace now. And it does, absolutely. But stage one is getting this learner-centered right for the learning environment or the change environment. Or we sort of don't get off the starting block. So I wanted to bring you to methodology. And remember, I said that this doesn't actually involve technology first. It actually involves methodology first. So often what happens, and I'm going to use COVID as an example here. So in COVID, we said, rightly so, it was a crisis. Oh God, we've got to put everything online. Let's go on Zoom or Teams or whatever it may be. So we took the same training that we'd done in the classroom, which may have been trainer focused, trainer centered, and we sort of plugged and played over in Zoom. Now, we had no choice, so there's nothing you could do but do that. But that is not the way to do it. The moment that we change the environment, we have to change the method, and often we have to change the blend. But I want to focus on the methodology first, because the methodology drives the blend. The methodology and the journey drives the blend. So EPIC stands for Experiential, Playful, Iterative and Collaborative. Now, this as a methodology has been tested or validated on about 35,000 people. So it's highly validated as for being accelerating. So this part of it doesn't scale. This part of it accelerates change in an individual rather than the entire organization. So it accelerates the learning outcomes. So if you like, it shrinks the time. So we have a trainer-centered day with information, you'll get so many outcomes that you can measure bringing back to the business. If it was on emotional well-being, let's just focus on that a second. And we said, I want to improve emotional well-being by these 3 factors and these 3 points, and this is what I'd like to see the transformational outcome in my business. Okay, so you would or not do that in a day or 2. The EPIC methodology allows you to do that in, say, 90 minutes, that same effect. So it greatly accelerates the transformation. Why? Because it's experiential and it's playful, fundamentally. They're the 2 things. So let's just take a look at those 2 things. So the experiential learning is learner-centered, where you're putting the observed, so you're following a structure. There's not much content. When I say content, there's not much prescriptive information. It's an activity-based thing where you're putting the group into, or the person into, an experience. The excuse almost is the activity, and then you're allowing them the reflection, and that's where the learning is. The learning is in the reflection on what we've just observed and experienced. So as a group, you're then getting that social environment. So they observe, reflect, and then they grow. So you'd have a number of activities together if you were doing like an experiential event that come together to create so many learning outcomes. Now, do they adapt their behavior? Some will, some won't. The behavior changes up to them. but the influence of change is very large with this style of learning. So they tend to be influenced to change because there's a motive in it for them to do so, if that makes sense. Am I moving too fast, or are we okay?
No, can you give an example of what an experiential learning intervention might be, or an activity in the context of well-being then?
Yeah, a growth mindset one is a good example. So what we would do is very quick design of a 90-minute session here in verbal terms would be, let's say we're trying to get the learning outcome is to increase emotional well-being. So just focus on emotional well-being. So we'd look at emotional well-being and cover maybe overcoming anxiety, dealing with stress, and developing a growth mindset. I'm literally making this up on the fly. So then we'd break that down and say we can probably have 4 or 5 activities in that time, in that 90 minutes. So you'd open it up with a context. So they do need a context, and need a little bit of what is it, why are we doing it? And then as much experiential. So it's always about 90-10, 10% content, 90% play. And then in the activities, you'd build building blocks. It's almost like you're doing building blocks. So you'd do an activity on overcoming anxiety, which you then dovetail into how to overcome stress, and then maybe into growth mindset with warm-ups. So if you think about growth mindset, you're putting them in there and creating something where they can create it as a group. So they're having a game. It's not always a game. Sometimes it's an activity, but it's always experiential. So then they're observing through the activity, understanding how a growth mindset develops. And then they're understanding the technique to develop a growth mindset. And then there's anchoring in it. So you're anchoring new messaging in, more the motive. Why do I need to do it? What's in it for me if I do it? And it's really, that part of it is very unconscious, what we call unconscious learning. And then on the reflection, they start to disseminate that whole thing and say, wow, this is what I've learned, but they're coming up with the learning outcomes. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So you've got an overall learning outcome, but you're not prescribing this is good and this is bad. This is not good, this is not bad. They're coming up with the learning outcome. And that's good because they obviously buy into it as well. I'm quite with the audience, more than happy to share activities and stuff like that if they want to try them out and give us some feedback as well. So moving on to the play bit. Now the play and the experiential do get a bit mixed up, but play is playful. So effectively, we are meant to play all our life through, humans. There's a thing called neoteny. You can look it up on Google. I won't explain it now, but look it up, neoteny. And what it means is, as primates, or a type of primate we have to play all our life through. So there's a guy called Stuart Brown, really recommend him, like Hegel. Stuart Brown started the National Institute of Play in the United States, and he's a genius, this guy, and he's got a TED talk. Of course he has, silly me. And he's a neuroscientist on play and the damage it does if we don't play, and he's got some really good stories. Now what happens if we don't play? He says the opposite to play is not work, the opposite to play is depression. So it's really damaging if we don't do it. But play, in these learning terms that we're talking here, some things are not right to be playful. And then actually emotional well-being is one of them. So a lot of the activities in emotional well-being, some would be fun, but a lot of them are very deep, but not necessarily fun. Okay, so you have to, if you're facilitating change with activities or tools, you have to be really mindful when you use play. Because if you're doing creative thinking, it's very appropriate. If you do emotional well-being, you've got to be careful. And you could find yourself in a very sticky situation where something isn't funny and you try to ha-ha it. So just be mindful. Use play and experiential learning intermittently, using common sense. for that. Playful is very, very good for psychological safety, because there's no wrong answer. You're just playing. People with experiment, they'll get creative, they'll challenge decisions because it's playful, they'll think critically, and of course it's social, they'll collaborate. And this is what happens in the state of play. Back to that brain. And what we can see is that the brain is lit up like a Christmas tree. And on the right-hand side, passive learning. We want them involved. It accelerates learning. Being really selfish, it just accelerates learning. You got anything to say there, Dawn?
No. I was just reflecting on times where I've been in learning environments where it's been playful, and I think I was bringing it back to personal experience, and they are the ones that stick in your head, aren't they? They really are the ones that create that lasting change, that change your mindset, because it makes it memorable. I was just thinking as well, though, are those types of environment, how do you balance that with different personality types as well, and different groups, in terms of people being more willing to speak up in those types of environments versus others?
It's a really good point you're making there, because learner-centered environment is very personal, it's individualizing. So you have to make it very clear at the beginning of a session that you learn in your own way. You observe if you want to observe, you join in if you want to join in. There is absolutely no way of doing it wrong. Yeah. And somebody could learn just as much observing other people playing. And if that's their preferred learning style, crack on. Yeah. You do not feel pressurized to join in if you're not comfortable. And there's this big thing which we haven't got time to go on through today, but about introversion versus extroversion. And a lot of people have talked about this in play. Oh, do introverts like this? That doesn't play a part in my experience. Introverts will just get just as involved if they're interested in the subject. And it's almost like an insult to introverted people to believe they don't get involved with play or experiential learning, because they absolutely do. But it has to mean something to them. And everybody's got their own personal style. And I think the thing is about learner-centered environment is we have to respect everybody's difference in how they behave in that classroom, and never judge it. And that's from my learning experience, by the way. Sorry.
And I guess bringing it back to well-being, then I think at WorkBuzz we talk a lot about being intentional. And I think that's it, isn't it? It's just being really mindful of everyone there and their own personal needs, in terms of creating that inclusive environment where they feel psychologically safe. And to do that, you need to be really intentional about it.
100%.
And it shows that degree of care when you do, doesn't it? So, you know, when we're talking about preventative well-being, it has to be kind of really intentional, really thought through, and just something that you have to keep working on and kind of give that time and space to achieve it.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And I think as long as you're respectful of your intent, right, and you're respectful and you don't make judgment, you can't really go wrong. Allow that environment that means psychologically safe, means everybody feels okay to be themselves. Yeah. And they should, and they must. And that's in any classroom, but it's certainly in a learner-centered one. Now, in well-being, you can forget, as I said, it's almost got to be learner-centered to get the transformation, because we want people to go and look after their own emotional health, but we need to give them the skills to do it. So just to go back a bit there, we do something called Employee Healthcare Plus, which is a physical health check, an emotional health check, and an introspection one. So there's 3 looks at that before you go into all this other stuff, so that you know your numbers, so you know where you are. But coming back to when they're actually there, you know, generally when you're doing a sort of intervention, if you've done your numbers, you know the state of play generally, but you'll never know the state of somebody's emotional health because we're not in their mind individually. So that's why we need to manage the environment so carefully. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you're saying that kind of organizations need to almost have a temperature check on each individual in terms of understanding where they are in all of those perspectives to get those foundations
really good
right.
point. Really good point. They can get a temperature check on the environment. So how's the environment affecting the well-being? Because that's the cultural thing, right? Yeah. So what's the state of my environment health, right? Oh, sorry. What's the impact of my environment on people's health and well-being? Yeah, that can be measured, no problem. From an external point of view, you can look at that data. The physical health check, easy, know your numbers. If your high blood pressure is there, it's there. It's there to be seen. Now, individually, we don't know the numbers. We know them collectively because that's personal information. Introspectively, then people do an assessment which they know the state of their own health, because we need to facilitate them to develop their own introspectively their own health. We need to give them the techniques. We can't know their internal state. And this goes back to that circle of influence again. But what we can know is everything else around it, so that we do something called a tri-holistic, sounds a bit jargony, but tri-holistic assessment. So it assesses the physical, mental, and emotional well-being. But of course, the internal introspection assessment is theirs, and they've got that data. And if they want to share it, then great. But we can't force them to share that data, and we can't aggregate that data because it's so internal. But it's really important that they do that assessment. So it's really important you know the numbers on everything, whether we know them ourselves individually or whether the organization knows the greater data. Yeah. Because that's basically how you get preventative well-being. You start with knowing your numbers and the end in mind, and then these interventions are in between to start walking us through that journey of ignite, embed, grow, and sustain. So habit change is a completely different thing. This is the opposite to ignite. Repetition of the experiential process, but like on 1 minute a day. So we've got something called mind nudging to do that. However you choose to do that, it has to be quick, and it has to be repetitive, and it has to be unconscious. Because we're changing habits, we need the unconscious learning to go on here. Changing one thought, belief, or bias at a time. It's iterative, but over time, amazing results. Okay. And the other thing here to do for this habit change from an external point of view, so again, not the mind nudging a second, but the external environment, is change the organizational language. To highlights on this one is why we're doing what we're doing, the purpose, what we do want, what we do have, what we can do. All of this sort of high level constructive language that focuses on where we're going and why we need to go there, as opposed to keep blocking behaviors, blocking language and blocking behavior around the organization. So that will come out in a preventative well-being assessment. Okay. And that language is relatively easy to change if you do it with the right approach, if that makes sense. How are we doing for time?
Got about 10 minutes left.
Good Lord. I mean, I hope this is hitting the mark for people. I'm more than happy to answer any questions as well. I want to leave sort of 5 minutes. You need 5 minutes at the end, yeah? Is that right?
No, keep going. We can go to about 8 minutes and we can wrap up in a couple. So keep going.
Amazing. So collaboration, that's the fourth on the EPIC, is really critical. I think that goes without saying, but we need to create new knowledge together. So it's how we create that sort of social learning at this point comes in, and also the whole psychologically safe working environment, not just learning environment. So we need to get that new knowledge creation. Otherwise, all we're doing is refiltering old knowledge, and old knowledge is old very quickly at this moment in time. And we want to innovate, want to stay ahead of the game. So the journey is very much ignite, embed, and grow. So ignite, basically we're going, I'm taking you actually through what you can do at this point. You can do experiential workshops, you can do away days. Ignite, included in Ignite, is actually all the assessments to ignite where we are, so we know our numbers. So if you were assessing physical well-being, emotional well-being and mental well-being, you're going to get a good picture of where you are, the state of play and what needs to change. Embed is really just to give you a breakdown on the actual blend here. So what I'm actually showing is the blend in each part to give you examples of blends you can put in. Mind nudging is something that we innovated, but mind nudging is anchoring, priming the mind with a new frame or thought per day in the morning for 1 to 3 minutes that primes the unconscious mind with an anchor as you're going about your day. So they would tend to do mind nudging sprints for about 24 days and then maybe leave it a couple of months, do another sprint, and do sprints throughout the year to sustain and embed and sustain the new way of thinking, whatever that may be, whatever needs to change. Certainly in a well-being culture, which really we focus on, it's things like you might start off on the emotional side, and then you might move to higher order thinking. You might move to creative thinking, problem solving, critical thinking, and move higher up as we go throughout the year in the sprints. But very often it starts with dealing with the emotional ill health with the first sprint. But it primes the mind, very, very effective. It is experiential. So they get a task each morning to do, to observe and to reflect. So it's still following that experiential learner-centered approach. And then grow. And with grow, to share some options, I love sharing this. John Hagel doesn't call learning tribes, but he talks about it in a way of getting groups together of 16 maximum per group, very safe environments where these two things can happen, where a learning tribe can stay together and share tacit knowledge and create new knowledge together. So a learning tribe doesn't need to be a team. It can be people who are like-minded, and they, get together to share knowledge and develop together, if you like. So lifelong learners would be really into this type of thing. And obviously to do that, we need it engaging, all of this pleasure response. It has to be set in the right environment. Good news about learning tribes, it doesn't cost anything to develop, does it? You can use Teams, you can use Zoom. It just takes championship for doing it, advocacy. Technology is already there. So learning tribes is a great way to grow and develop and sustain. Other way, you use activities, the experiential activities, or behavior games we call them, and you play them out into weekly meetings. Now, not everybody is in a position to do this because they don't all have weekly meetings, but it's a great way for the leaders to develop the well-being or preventative, create that culture in their team with a tool in their hand. So the leaders can facilitate these activities, but so can champions. Say you had an hour-long meeting and you put the development into the meeting, so 10 minutes at the beginning or the end. I'd do it at the beginning because then the meeting normally goes better because everyone's in a good mood. And what you're doing is you're putting the team development and preventative well-being, at least, into the team meeting. So you're not eating up any other time or space. So that's a really good way of sustaining and carrying on growing, because over time that compounds, that 10 minutes a week. Yeah, and it's very effective. I'm more than happy to give people a starter pack through you, Dawn, if you want us to do that. But now, if anyone does have any questions or wants anything or needs some clarification, I'm happy to support that.
Amazing. Well, we'll look to see if any questions start coming through. But I think from what I've heard today, it's just really important to get that foundation right, isn't it? When you're talking about preventative well-being, it's almost as an organisation putting this front and centre. So if this is woven into everything that you do, you know, in terms of leadership capability, in terms of creating that right environment that is psychologically safe, that is built on trust, then it's about the different interventions that you can put in at each stage of your EPIC methodology and cycle to kind of really move that forward and take them on that journey from understanding why it matters, why it's so important. But then through those little nudges, making sure that each individual knows where they are, so they know kind of what they need to do within their circle of control. But then on the leaders and managers, knowing their people well enough to know where they are as well, so they can support them, so they can coach them, so they can mentor them, so they can encourage them. And almost weaving in some of these activities into those touch points that you may have with your team on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, whenever you get together. But again, it's been really intentional, isn't it? It's about making sure that it's not just a one-off. And I got really, no, this is probably the wrong phrase actually, but I got excited at the beginning of the pandemic, thinking that the experiences that we were going through would create lasting change. But we tend to go back, don't we, and go to what was done. We go back to what happened before really so quickly, and we don't take those opportunities to learn. So I think that's what I'm hearing across organisations at the moment is we just need to stop for a second and just really think again about what we did learn. You know, what should we stop doing? What should we start doing? What should we continue doing that really had an impact on that employee experience from a wellbeing perspective? And think about it, be really intentional about what we do going forwards. And I think some of the things that you've shared today, Fi, could really help organisations think about that differently. And it's not just about wellbeing, it's about creating that right learning environment for that to happen, isn't it?
Yeah, I think everything's dovetailing in employee experience learning into the workplace in the 21st century, isn't it? And well-being isn't out on its own. It's a cultural thing. We have to build it in, like you say, with intent. There was one thing we didn't cover actually, which people may want to address or think about, which is how preventative workplace well-being dovetails into responsive workplace well-being. So is it throw your toys out with the bathwater? Absolutely not. Like yoga, meditation, all these things, that's responsive well-being, is still completely valid. But it's how we dovetail it in. It's no good having this responsive without the preventative.
Yeah,
we want both, and both will work really well together. If that makes sense. I didn't actually cover that.
Another one of those linkages really is around, we talk a lot at WorkBuzz around enabling organisations to make data-driven decisions. So it's almost understanding where you are from a wellbeing perspective, but using leading data to look at how that's changing over time. And that from a leadership perspective keeps it front of mind as well. If you know how people are feeling and you're checking in on that regularly, then it enables you to look for hotspots and bits and pieces as well. And I think what you talked about is that importance of knowing the numbers. So whether you're knowing those numbers organisationally, or whether you have apps or technology in place that enables an individual to almost track their own health, physical, mental, emotional well-being, then it's that combination of using that data to really help move people forward along your model and methodology, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's impossible in this day and age to do anything without some data.
Yeah,
like the organizations need the data, otherwise they're going to waste time, money and resources, and they're going to fail their people. So they need the data. They have to. And
actually, there was a really powerful Deloitte report out this week with a figure in the billions on the current estimation of the cost of businesses from a mental health and wellbeing perspective. So that's worth a find, which we might.
Oh, which one's that one? Is that the latest one?
Yeah, so it came out this week. So We'll include the link to that actually in the follow-up as well, but it's got some really interesting statistics kind of with the monetary impact for business as well. Anyway, we are at 12 o'clock. Thank you so much for joining us, Fi, and being a guest on probably the craziest day of your life. And
so thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. I'm honoured.
And thank you to everyone for joining, and you will receive a follow-up email with the pack from Fi and the recording from today if you did want to share it on, or and we're here for any additional questions that you might have afterwards.
And if anyone wants any slides, let us know. I'll do them through you. I'll send them through you, Dawn. And Rebecca, thank you very much as well. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Have
Cheers,
a great day,
guys.
everyone.
Have a nice day, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for your time.